and about 2 years ago, when I was 30, I cast a ballot for the first time electing a mayor. So I voted since I was 18 all the way to 30, and my candidate for mayor was never elected. And so I was thrilled when Joyce Craig beat Ted Gatzis.
Yeah, that away.
And let me tell you, the change that she's been able to make in this past 2 years has been incredible. If you see a pothole in Manchester, you take out your phone, you do an app, and in 24 hours that pothole is filled.
Whoa.
Raising the pride flag, making a difference for people to show that Manchester is a place where everyone is welcome, no matter whom you love. That's progress, Manchester.
Yeah. Woo.
And for people with young families or people who care about education, Mayor Joyce Craig has been a champion moving our schools forward. And this fall, we're going to send a group of great school board members to help her do that in Manchester.
Yeah, that away.
So before we elect a president in 2020, we have to re-elect our great mayor and my friend Joyce Craig.
Yeah! That away, Joyce. Yeah, Joyce, do it. Woo!
So thank you so much, Gene, and I have to give credit where credit is due. We're all here today because last year, Gene came up with this great idea to have Democrats get together for a picnic in the park, and it's grown significantly this year. So thank you, Gene, for doing this. It's a great opportunity for us to get together and make sure we're supporting everyone up and down the ticket.
Yeah, that away.
And as Gene mentioned, I've been in office for all of a year and a half, and we have been able to make significant progress because we are all working together, and that's the key here. We're all working together. So this September, this November, it's so important that we make sure everybody turns out and votes, not only for mayor, but for school board and aldermen, and all the way down the ticket, because I can't do it alone. I need your support. We all need your support. So thank you for being here. Thank you for caring, and have a great day.
Thank you, Gene. That away, Gene.
Yeah, I got a 5-month-old fan club. Thank you, Kate. I forgot to mention, in sort of my excitement for Mayor Joyce Craig, that I am running for school board this fall.
Go, Gene, go!
So I hope I can count on your support. Laura Quiroga and I really need to be able to be elected on the school board to be able to bring change, bring common sense back to our school board. So those are the kind of key races, and also we need to make sure, I saw her earlier, I want to make sure she's here, but Katie DeRocher, our next alderwoman at large.
Katie! Get away, Katie!
We desperately need Katie, and if you know who her opponent is, you know exactly why.
Oh!
He's kind of Trump before Trump, if you will. But now it's my honor to introduce someone. Growing up in Manchester, I always have a rule that I try to give money to candidates locally first, then statewide, and usually federal. It's very rare for me to extend a contribution over to someone, but last election cycle I saw a charismatic, dynamic, forward-looking leader, and it was easy for him to sort of bash Cruz, but he didn't do that. He talked about what the future of our country was going to be about and how we were going to bring people together. And running for president, he's doing the exact same thing. It's not just about Donald Trump, it's how we're bringing folks together and unifying this country. He's a father of young kids, and so he knows personally that it's not about us, it's about them. And so we're so thrilled to have him in Manchester. Beto O'Rourke.
Buenas tardes. Good to see everybody. Yeah, thank you all for being here. And for those who helped to supply the food and the beverages, thanks for feeding and taking care of everybody. We try to do our part and bring in some pasta salad. So if you're ready for the second course, it has just arrived. Please dig in and enjoy. Gene, thanks for organizing, bringing out your incredibly beautiful, amazing family, bringing out the littlest among us to remind us what this election is all about, which is the future of this country. Those who think not about this poll or even the next election, but the next generation, are those who will be able to serve this country and ensure that we live up to our highest potential, that we fulfill the promise of this country for everyone, especially those who succeed us. So very grateful, Gene, for what you're doing. Mayor Craig, thank you for your public service. Thank you for the incredibly tough race that you're running right now, coming out, listening to people, making sure that they're represented and reflected, not just in your public service, but out here on the campaign trail. This kind of direct accountability, direct democracy is fundamental to our prospects, not just here in Manchester, but as a country, 243 years into this experiment. For some, it is an open question as to whether we can still pull this off, whether this democracy will still represent people, not corporations, people, not special interests, people, not political action committees or lobbyists, but the people right here. And only by showing up, not writing anybody off, not taking anyone for granted, making sure that everyone counts. Only in that way do we ensure that this democracy will still work and respond to the needs, meet the urgency that we feel about every single challenge that we face right now. I understand that Senator Susi is here as well. Senator, thank you for joining us as well. Very grateful for your public service too. So we got to New Hampshire last night, arrived at the airport in Boston, had the genius idea of trying to leave Boston at 5 p.m. on a Friday. So got to see the best of Boston weekend traffic. But as we came into New Hampshire, just extraordinarily beautiful. I come from El Paso, Texas. We're in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, connected to Ciudad Juarez, where the Rio Grande River joins, does not separate us. At the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, our base elevation is 4,000 feet. Beautiful in its own right, but perhaps missing all this green stuff that you guys call grass and trees, the rivers that we drove by, and then the kindness of the people who met us when we arrived in Peterborough last night. And we arrived for one of these Lights for Liberty events. You may have had one here in Manchester. I'm hearing that 2 people came to the one in Manchester. The applause I just heard. For those of you who did not have the chance to participate, these were events that took place all over this country and actually around the world yesterday to make sure that we're standing up for those kids who are in our custody and in our care and in our detention right now on the border at the Clint Border Patrol Station, where they're sleeping on concrete floors under aluminum blankets, where they've been separated from their parents, where they don't know when or if they will ever see them again, being kept in the most inhumane conditions. In fact, over the course of the last year, 6 children, kiddos, at their most vulnerable and desperate, died in the custody of the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, a country which is comprised of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over. And this right now is how we are treating the least of us, which is a reflection on who we are and who we will be unless we change course right now. Because it's not just at the Border Patrol Station in Clint, it's at Homestead in Florida, where there are 2,600 kids being kept in a POW-style camp where they're not allowed any kind of human interaction with the other kids, including their siblings. There are kids who are in foster care homes that literally God only knows where, because their parents have been deported back to El Salvador, to Honduras, to Guatemala, half a world away, the very countries from which they fled in the first place, trying to bring their kids to safety and to shelter and to refuge. And I've been there when those kids, in these exceptional circumstances, have been reunited with that parent who risked her life for them. And on that child's face is not a big goofy smile, which is what my 8-year-old's face has when I come home off the road. No tears of joy, no spark of recognition, no impatience to tell their parent everything that they've experienced. There is nothing on that face. Absolute vacant expression. I can only imagine it is reflective of the inability to connect with the person with whom you associate the greatest pain that you have felt in your young life. Associate that parent with the perilous 2,000-mile journey that you took. Imagine walking on foot from here to El Paso, Texas, about 2,100 miles, sometimes catching a ride in a bus, very often riding on top of, not inside of a train known as the Beast or La Bestia, surviving every manner of depredation along the way and making it here and then being incarcerated and separated from your families. That's what those kids are going through right now. But in the face of this inhumanity was our humanity in Peterborough last night. 150 people who themselves are 2,000 miles from the US-Mexico border stood up to be counted at this defining moment of truth for those kids and for this country and for our kids who are counting on us right now, while we still can, to do the right thing. And it is a reminder that at our best, whenever we have faced choices like this one, whenever we have overcome the greatest challenges, we've done it by standing up, by coming out in meetings like these, by marching in the streets, by the civil disobedience that distinguished the civil rights protesters and marchers of the 1950s and the 1960s, literally taking their lives into their own hands, far too often losing their lives, not just for those who look like them, not just for those who are marching, but for the civil rights of every single one of us. 55 years ago, President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act. It was introduced by his predecessor, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but it was really forced by those people in the Birmingham campaign in 1963. And you've seen the images. Some of you may have been down there, in fact, when water hoses were trained on children. Water hoses that could peel bark off that tree right there, directed at kids. And those images shocked the conscience of this country. How else do you explain how a white majority country founded on racism and a system of inequality came together and democratically ensured that we passed and signed into law equal protection, at least in name to begin with, for our fellow Americans, no matter their race or their ethnicity, their creed, or how many generations they've been an American, or whether they've just gotten here the week before. I'm confident that those of you who came out last night, those of you who will come out in the nights coming forward, will form the conscience of this country and ensure that we rewrite our immigration laws in our own image. Never again detain another child. Never separate another family. Move every mountain, bear any burden, to reunite those who've been separated so far, to make sure that we follow our own conscience and our morals and our asylum laws, to welcome those who are fleeing the deadliest places on the planet and have nowhere else to go, knowing full well that the ultimate beneficiary of their presence is not just that asylum seeker or refugee, not just their family, but all of us. Their genius, the jobs that they'll work, the families that they'll raise, the art that they will create, the quality of life that they will improve, all of that is to the benefit of every single one of us. And I know that on any challenge we face, whether it's the treatment of these kids on the border, rewriting our immigration laws, freeing every dreamer from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this, their true home country, listening to those in this community who, though we live in the wealthiest place on the planet, cannot afford to see a doctor or take their child to a therapist or afford the copay on their medication, only by coming together and hearing their stories, having common cause to pursue the common good, we're going to guarantee universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care. Only by knowing the stories of those who are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, the fact that they cannot take time off to spend time with their parents or their kids or taking care of themselves when they're sick, only by listening to them and reflecting them and seeing ourselves in our fellow Americans will we guarantee a minimum wage that is a living wage, paid time off following the great lead of our state legislators despite their best efforts, vetoed by this governor, but we will overcome that veto and make sure that everyone can take care of themselves and their families, making sure, as I've learned here, the highest level of student loan indebtedness in the country, the fact that every single one of us and our children should be able to afford higher education, should be able to afford to live here or come back to this state, should be able to have their student loan debt wiped clean if they dedicate themselves to public service in a public education classroom or in the VA taking care of those veterans who put their lives on the line for this country. Listening to one of your colleagues right now in Amherst who told me about the challenge of PFAS, of these toxins that have leached into our water supply, and the level of pediatric cancer here in New Hampshire that is greater than any other state in the union right now. Wow. When I think about those kids who face those challenges, it's not too unlike those kids on the border in my community who face those challenges. By knowing their stories, repeating them, reflecting them in how we campaign and in how we serve, we bring this very divided, highly polarized country back together again in service to meeting the greatest challenges we've ever faced. And I know that we can do it. So listen, know that I am grateful for the fact that every single one of you is here right now, not for a candidate and not for a political party, but for your country. This is going to be the moment, I guarantee you, when your daughter looks back 20 years from now, she will know that this was the moment that we defined the future of America. And that future was either one born of fear, expressed in walls 2,000 miles long, 30 feet high, at a cost of $30 billion, kids in cages, banning Muslims, all people of one religion from the shores of a country that is comprised of people of all religions and walks of life from the world over. Or else we will define ourselves by our ambition and our aspiration and the work and the resolve and the creativity that we will employ in order to achieve them. That is what I am betting on and banking on. That is why I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States. And that's why I want every single one of us to come together in service to this great country at this moment. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Beto!
Cynthia's got a microphone. I'd love to answer your questions or hear what's on your mind. Include your story in this conversation. If you raise a hand, she'll bring that mic to you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
50 years ago, there was another civil rights action that happened in New York City. I know you're very well aware, Stonewall.
Absolutely.
For the past 50 years, we have fought and fought for equal rights, which we still don't have. Past few years, we've gone backwards 50 years. But there's a hidden right that I don't think most of the candidates have been fighting for. And besides housing and marriage equality, I've been married to the same person, and I can't donate blood. Because the federal government has decided that unless you are abstained for a year as a gay man, you can't donate blood. But my neighbor, who's single, can have sex with as many people as he wants and donate tomorrow. Are you committed to eliminating that law as quickly as possible when you take office?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. And listen, on this really important larger point that you made at the outset, some of us, and I'll include myself in this, labored in ignorance under the impression that progress was inexorable. Maybe it's not happening quickly enough. Maybe I would have done this a little bit differently. But by and large, look at the Civil Rights Act, look at the Voting Rights Act, look at marriage equality. This country moves in the right direction. Not something that we can take for granted, and maybe not something that was even true to begin with. When you look at the fact that in Texas, despite marriage equality, you can be fired from your job based on your sexual orientation. In Texas, though there are 30,000 kids in the foster care system, and CPS so underfunded that many of those kids are sleeping in the Child Protective Service offices, you could be too gay to adopt one of those children into your home. We need to go much further than we've achieved so far. Beyond signing the Equality Act into law, which guarantees the full civil rights, we also need to make sure that we end this prohibition on the donation of blood, end the transgender troop ban, make sure that we vigorously prosecute crimes against transgender Americans in this country. There's an epidemic of violence that we are seeing, not met with the urgency or the resources or the prosecution or the justice that it deserves. And then we need a president who does not just tolerate or respect our differences, but fully embraces them as foundational to our strength and our success. That's what I will do for you. Thank you.
Hi, Congressman. Thanks for coming. Thanks for taking my question. Thank you for coming to Homestead. I was there that day. I saw you. I was there witnessing. I saw how moved you were. I heard your eloquence. Thanks for continuing to lift it up. It really matters. As you know, a lot of us were inviting the candidates who were there in Miami to come 25 miles down the road to Homestead, and not everyone did. Not everyone stayed to see the kids, but you did. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And this is my son, Tara King. I was looking over the ladder. I thought those kids look just like him. You know, just like my son.
Yeah.
So can you say a bit more? What would you do to end ICE, to end family separation?
Yeah.
Would you repeal 1325?
Yeah, let's completely rewrite 1325 so that no child, no man, no woman, no family is ever criminally prosecuted for doing what any human would do in the same set of conditions. When I talk to these families, and in fact, we went to a shelter, an alberga in Ciudad Juarez called Casa del Migrante, to ask folks, why did you make that journey from Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador? Something that may be obvious to some, but not to everyone in this country. They left because they had to. There was literally no option other than fleeing for their very lives. I met a young father who, with his wife and their 3 or 4-year-old child, made that 2,000-mile journey. And he talked about showing up to work one day at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. There are armed gangs waiting for him. They tell him, I know who your son is, I know who your wife is, you meet our demands or we are going to kill your family. He goes to the local police department and their advice to him is you should leave the country. He talks about crossing the Chihuahuan desert, spending 6 hours on one broiling hot day in the middle of the summer, losing one of his shoes, talks about the sun on the back of his neck, the sun reflected off of that sand, somebody with whom he was traveling dying along the way of exposure to the elements. His child on his shoulders finally makes it to the United States, is apprehended because he turns himself in, spends 3 days in one of these hileras or ice boxes, one of these border patrol stations, then is remanded back to Mexico, penniless, without a resource or a friend to his name in that country, waiting in line to be processed by our own asylum laws. That guy did not want to take on that journey just for kicks, or to steal someone's job, or to take our benefits, or to change the character of this country. He came because he had no choice, and if he is successful here, his success will follow in the best traditions of this country and will accrue to the benefit of all of us. So realizing that, we end the criminalization of people for doing everything that is human. We free those families who are detained right now. We use a family case management program that ensures that they can stay in the community of Manchester or El Paso or wherever they are in the United States at 1/10 of the cost of incarceration. We end, by the way, the for-profit detention incarceration corporations. They don't get any more of our business. They don't lock up any more immigrants. And then we make sure that we welcome those who have no other place to go. We lift the caps on our visa quotas. We ensure that there's a safe, orderly, legal process to come work a job, join your family, or flee persecution in this country. That is America living up to its promise to us and to the rest of the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, right behind you.
Hey
Hey,
there.
Beto. My question is healthcare. I was almost in the Guinness World Book of Records for being the earliest baby born in 1986. I was born 23 weeks early. I was a triplet and they didn't make it. And I work within the community. I've given a speech in Westchester County on my life growing up being born early. And people talk to me after this event, and they say, I have a child being born early, I'm going bankrupt.
Yeah.
And they're walking away, and they have nothing. And all they care about is they just want their child to be born as healthy as it can be, but they can't focus on that. They focus on these mounting healthcare bills. And I don't know why in this country we don't have a national healthcare service. I don't see the issue why we just can't put politics aside, take some money from the overbloated defense budget, and just put a healthcare program.
Yeah.
It's awful. And I have Republican friends that I talk to, and I give them my story, and they don't seem to care. And it's like, healthcare affects everybody. Yet these same Republicans, their hands are out for Social Security. Their hands are out for Medicare. Democratic programs And also I want to say thank you for your eloquence and your sophistication. My grandfather was in World War II, and he was a Nazi hunter after the war, and he was in the CIA, and he was thanked by John F. Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
And you really remind me, and I know that you remind him of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah. Yes, I'd be very happy to send it. I'll sign it right after this event. So first of all, thank you for having the courage to share your story, to bring us all in. That's what I hope to be able to do in this campaign. The statistics, the numbers, sometimes the facts can become an abstraction for people. When we all listen to you and meet you, we're brought into your story and we care about you. Y no me importa, we don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or whether you can even vote at all. We just want to be there for you. That's my impulse, at least. That's what I'm compelled to do. And what you describe makes so much practical sense to make sure that that expecting mother can focus on the well-being of her child, or that parent that we just met in Amherst who talks about her son with autism and the fact that she wants to make sure that there are more state and federal supported services because they're paying $10,000 out of pocket for his care. They shouldn't have to do that in this country. She says, thank God that I have the means to, but there are other parents who do not. In my home state of Texas, you tell me if it's like this in New Hampshire. The largest provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. The largest inpatient mental health care facility is the Harris County Jail. We pay $110 a night to keep someone locked up who, for their schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, got arrested on purpose to get care in the one place that was going to be guaranteed. Imagine the savings we would realize with world-class outpatient mental health care, and the fact that we now unlocked that person, literally freed them to live to their full potential. We know that we have a maternal mortality and an infant mortality crisis in this country. Cynthia, microphone. Yeah, all right. We know that we've got a maternal and an infant mortality crisis in this country. Maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for women of color. The infant mortality disparity between white America and black America today is greater than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. So, to your point, what if we invested in world-class, universal, high-quality healthcare for every American, and then ensured we also invested in home healthcare visits, doulas, midwives, make sure that that's covered, more mothers survive, and then this, healthcare is primary healthcare, mental healthcare, but healthcare is also every woman making her own decisions about her own body and having access to the care that makes that possible. So we can do all this. I'm with you. And let's not write anybody off, regardless of their party. Bring everyone into the solutions. That's how we get it done. I'm going to look for you afterwards so I can sign this for you, okay?
Right over here.
Yep. Hey.
Hey, sir, I've got a couple of comments for you. One is a positive, I don't know, a question. The average American probably did not grow up the way you did, okay? So I'm curious about that just because I'm not familiar. My point, I've got that question. The second question is, in all the news media, we're talking about the children that are put in cages and all that. And of course, we're all concerned about all the children put in cages. That's all I'm hearing about. How's about the parents that are losing their children? Where are the parents? I've not heard anything about the parents.
Yeah.
And now, where are you in this ball game? And did you grow up with a silver spoon in your mouth? I mean, who are you?
Yeah.
I don't know who you are.
Great.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate you being out here. Thank you.
I'm doing the best I can with the tools I got.
Me too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the question is, who am I? I'll try to, it's a big question, right? And I'll try to give you
Grew up in a rich family.
a good answer. Yeah, so 4th generation El Pasoan. On my mom's side, her dad was in the Air Force from Georgia originally. Met my mom's mom in Albuquerque. They moved down to El Paso. And in 1950, this was kind of the exception at the time, she started a small business, a furniture store that my mom later worked in, and I and my sisters worked in as we were growing up. My dad, on his dad's side, descendant of Irish immigrants, came over in the 19th century, worked the railroad from Missouri to Nebraska to Tucumcari, New Mexico. So, gentleman asked if I'm a Mick. I mean, if you want to put it that way, American. And so, grew up in El Paso. I had opportunities that others didn't. Got to go to college, had a work-study job every year, took out student loans every single year to make sure that I could afford that education, and then tried to make the most of it in life, starting a small business, serving on the El Paso City Council, serving 3 terms in Congress, and then running for the United States Senate. Father of 3, Ulysses, who's 12, Molly, who just turned 11, Henry, who is 8 years old. In some ways, not exceptional, in some ways, very exceptional. I'll just give you one example. Not something that I understood at the time, something that is becoming crystal clear to me right now. When I started that small business, following in my grandmother's footsteps in 1999, went to the bank, couldn't get a loan. Was starting a technology company. I had no collateral to pledge against the value of that loan. My dad, who owned the house, it was now fully paid for after they'd paid those mortgage payments every single month, could take out a loan against that home and turn around and lend that money back to me. I could use that money to invest in our equipment and hire people and start a business. What I have learned is that might be the story in much of white America, but in black America, which has the 10th of the wealth that white America does, not by accident, but by design, redlined out of the home loans that would have allowed the building of equity that could have served as the seed capital for starting a small business, has literally been written, drawn, locked out of so much of the economic success that you're right, that I took for granted growing up. Now incumbent upon me.
Appreciated what you had.
That's right. But now I've got to appreciate the challenge that others have in this country and make sure that it's a more equal and equitable playing field for every child who's born into this country, from education to healthcare to economic participation. So that's a little bit of my story and a little bit of how it connects to other people's stories. Appreciate you asking.
Next question is
I
right
had the
here.
number 2 question about the childhood, people coming across the border. We're
What
talking
about the parents?
children. We're not talking about the parents.
Yeah.
Nothing on the news or anything. How's about the parents who have had their kids, their children ripped from their arms? I never hear anything on the news or anyplace else about the parents. How
We
do
do.
you think the parents feel about having their
We
kids?
do.
Real quick
hear
response
that.
to this question. The gentleman asked, we talked about the kids in these detention camps. What about their parents? We know that some of the parents, especially under the zero tolerance policy last year, were immediately arrested, separated from their kids, turned over to the Department of Justice, criminally prosecuted, then remanded to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, where they were deported back to the very country from which they fled. In many cases, no ability to track the whereabouts of their kids, no means or money to get back up here to fight for them, don't speak the language, do not know our system of justice or laws. One of the things that I said earlier, and I want to just reiterate now, as president, we will move mountains. We will pay any price to reconnect those families. We have the culpability. We separated them in the first place. And if that means bringing those parents back up from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, let us do that. If it means investing in the mental health care of those kids who've been deeply damaged, let us do that. Yes, let's make those families whole, and by extension, make this country better. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
away, Beto.
Okay, Beto, I need to pivot here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because we've been talking about this for a while. I want to bring this a little bit closer. And I want to talk about Social Security. Okay? You've been beating on Social Security. Every time there's a problem, let's take the money from Social Security. Okay? When our mortgages go up, our bills go up, and Social Security, you stick your hand in there and you suck out more money from there. You know, as we all, I mean, I'm a veteran and I'm on a threshold of being a senior. That's as far as you're going to know about me. But what I want to know is, what are you going to do to protect Social Security? It can't keep being the drain in the tub every time there's a problem. Absolutely. You got to put it back. You can't give us 2% or 0.75%. Who lives on a 0.75% raise? Or, no, not a raise, a little pittance that you give us. What are you going to do to help us? Put the money back to us. We worked. We gave it to the country. Okay? Now, what's the country going to help us? As a veteran, you really don't give us anything. The guy in the White House that we kind of donate to his salary, he says he's going to help veterans. Why? How? He's not doing anything. I'm going to donate my money to a veterans organization, but guess what? The veterans organization's got to come back and say, where's the check? Well, guess what, sir? We need that money too. We gave it to the country. Now we need the country to help us.
Yeah.
Okay? We're the policy people too. We gave it to the country. You see a lot of seniors here, even if they don't want to admit it. Okay? But we have a right to have the country help us.
Yes.
What you going to do?
Yeah.
This
Thank
young
you for your
lady,
question.
I've got to speak.
Appreciate
I'm
it.
sorry, I got to speak out.
Let me address her question just out of respect to her and the question she asked.
Waiting here to ask a question.
The American people millions or trillions of dollars that they hold in the background. Okay, that they can borrow. They cannot put it in the background.
Did he go to a New Hampshire school?
The federal
You think?
government is looking at taking away from Medicare or shrinking it. Guess what? Our federal government owes us a hell of a lot of money. What the heck is going on here? This is just
Okay, and then I have the mic right here.
I'm going to answer this question. Yeah. So
right.
I love the way that you asked the question because you talk about the problems that then are used as excuses to try to roll back the earned benefits. You paid into Social Security every working day of your life. You paid into Medicare. Those are not handouts or giveaways. Those are benefits that were earned and paid into and worked for. And in addition, y además, some will create the problems to then create the excuse to roll these back. So I'll give you an example. A $2 trillion tax cut, when we were already $21 trillion in debt, a tax cut that flows to the wealthiest and to corporations at a time of record wealth inequality was used as an excuse for quote unquote entitlement reform. Here's how we're going to meet this challenge to your question. We're going to ensure that every single American pays to their ability into the Social Security Trust Fund. Right now, every dime, every $1,000, every $1 million over the $132,000 that we've capped Social Security payments into the trust fund is lost to us. In our administration, the highest earners are also going to pay in. It will guarantee the viability of that program well into the next century. We will also, to your question, recalculate the benefits that are paid out so that it's actually a living benefit for those who paid in. Calculate based on your real costs of medication or transportation or whatever it is you're spending money on right now. And for those like you who have borne the battle for this country, put your life on the line. We're willing to lose it in service to all of us. I'm going to make sure that we fully fund the VA, world-class primary and mental health care treatment there, but also the post-9/11 GI Bill, but parity in educational benefits, parity in home health care benefits. If you have a loved one at home who's taking care of you or you are taking care of a veteran, we're going to make sure that we make it a little bit easier on you by investing in your ability to do that. And then lastly, I'm going to make sure that as president, we stop going to war everywhere around the world, in the wars that we are in, bring these service members back home, invest in their success right here in this country. Is it cheap? Absolutely not. Is it necessary? Absolutely. And I'm 100% committed to doing that. So appreciate you asking the question and grateful for your service. Thank you.
I have time for 3 more. Hi. I want to piggyback on that question. I guess I can tell you a little bit about myself. I came out here as a AmeriCorps Vista. Actually, my mission was to alleviate poverty, and instead I became a part of the system, and I haven't been able to get out since then. I got injured, I was assaulted by my boss, so trauma, and it's been a nightmare. I was in a flood, lots of things have happened. Anyways, my question is once you're in the system, it's incredibly difficult to get out. In fact, the system is not made to get out. So my question is, yes, we can raise Social Security, but once I'm in housing, which is federal housing right now. Once you have raised it, they raise your rent. So you never can get a leg up. what are you going to do to make sure that people actually can get out of the system? I've tried multiple times. Every time I try to get out, I'm thrown down on the ground again. And it's not anything I can do. It's a lot of red tape. They keep blaming the people that are in the system, so then they put more restrictions. I lost my Medicaid recently because I all of a sudden became ineligible. It's just everything keeps happening, and it's a spiral effect. What can you do to change the way the system is run?
Yeah. I really like your question, and again, this is another really big one, really important one. Part of it is in the way that all of us are going to serve together. Right now, it has become clear to many of us, maybe most of us, that this country's democracy favors those who can pay for access and influence and increasingly outcomes. How do you explain pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs that were invented by the American taxpayer in many cases, the research and innovation, the clinical trials, and have those sold back to us at the most expensive rates on the face of the planet? We don't allow Medicare to use its leverage and purchasing power to drive down the cost. We don't allow you to buy prescriptions from Canada or other countries that might sell it to you cheaper. It's because of those drug companies who've been able to buy into the system and keep a lock on that monopoly pricing. Those drug companies, and we know this story particularly well in New Hampshire, who purchased impunity. We think of Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis that they marketed to this country without paying any real consequences, no accountability, and no justice at the end of the day. That's not by accident. Housing, the fact that people live not just miles, hours from where they work, 2 hours in either direction. I've heard this about serving tourists in northern New Hampshire, driving 2 hours to be able to do that, making not enough to make ends meet or for the wear and tear or the fuel for your car. What if inclusionary zoning was conditioned on federal grants for housing so that we had the housing units that were necessary, they were affordable, and you could actually live closer to where you work? What if we had a minimum wage that was a living wage to break you out of a system that might have you locked in to 2 or 3 jobs at a time? Your child, you didn't have the luxury to read to her before her first night of kindergarten or first grade. She's already 10 months back in reading comprehension. She now is locked into that system. How do we break you out by changing the system altogether? I mentioned the disparity between white America and black America. That's another system that we're locked in. These forever wars, another system that we are locked into. So I think the only way that we're going to change this is by ensuring that our democracy, the single greatest mechanism to reveal the genius of a country, really responds to people and to our needs, and that we're listening to you and not to corporations or lobbyists or PACs. And so not only will I run this campaign in that way, no PACs, all people, but as president, we'll put democracy and responding in this accountable way at the center of everything we do. Same day, an automatic day, voting and registration, a new Voting Rights Act to remove the barriers, paper-based ballots, and end to gerrymandering. It's only then that this system that has really been a creation of those who can pay for access changes and reflects our interests, our needs, the challenges that we just described today, and the opportunities as we see them and want to achieve them. So thank you for asking the question.
Thank you.
Really good.
Thank you, Beto. Thank you.
Hi, Beto. First of all, thank you for taking the time out to be in Manchester.
Absolutely.
And I want to ask you on behalf of my friend Mary Georges and I, who are both on the school board in Wards 3 and 4, what you're going to do about education. Here in Manchester, we're working desperately hard to help our kids. And here in Manchester, we have the lowest per pupil spending in the state of New Hampshire. And it's being made worse by the fact that our state is downshifting costs. And we're getting little to no help from the federal government, despite all the mandates brought down by the federal government. So I'm just wondering, what are you going to do from the federal government on behalf of our kids here in Manchester?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the public service in focusing on public education. A couple ideas. I mentioned the mother that I just met in Amherst, whose child, she described, Cynthia, tell me if I get this wrong, but she described as high-functioning autistic and is spending $10,000 out of pocket because there are not the resources in her school district to provide for what her son needs. As president, I will make sure that we fully fund the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. Now listen, folks, this is not cheap, and we're all gonna have to pitch in. It's $20 billion a year additional. But once that money gets to your school district, it frees you to pay educators a higher salary so that they are not working a second or a third job. They're not out of their own pockets having to pay for the supplies, the clothing, the food for kids who do not have it at home. We're going to invest in true community schools. So in addition to the instruction, the nutrition, we're talking about primary and mental health care for kids who otherwise would have been denied it because of their income, because of their zip code, because of their immigration status. Those will not be barriers to those children being able to realize their full potential. We'll ensure that school starts not when you're 4 or 5 years old in kindergarten, but when you're 3 or 4 years old in pre-K, universal across the United States of America. Also an investment, but one that pays a very handsome return for this country. And then we're gonna have to face this, and I've brought this challenge up many times, but until we face it, account for it, and act on it, we're not gonna make it better. The disparity between Black America and white America, it's in healthcare, it's in criminal justice, it's in the economy, and it's in education. Minority-majority schools are underfunded to the tune of $23 billion a year in this country. Some have described a system of segregation in public education that is worse today in some parts of the country than it was in 1954 on the eve of Brown versus Board of Education. We're going to set up a $500 billion permanent education fund to address and invest in resolving those disparities. We're also going to ensure that we invest in historically Black colleges, minority-serving institutions, to ensure that we have teachers who look like the students in front of them in the classroom, so that we have equity as well as equality in funding. And then we're going to get behind you and the next iteration of federal education policy. So we went from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act. That next version, I literally want you at the table with me. So Cynthia, let's get her contact information to help us write that policy so that it meets the needs of your district. Thank you all for being here and for what you're doing. Gracias.
Thank you, Beto.
Thank you for coming again. I'm a student at St. Anselm College, and I major in psychology, and I'm thinking about pursuing a career in gerontology after grad. I conduct research on grandparent caregivers in New Hampshire specifically, who are affected by the opioid crisis, and especially in Manchester, New Hampshire, abroad. The opioid crisis affects many families. Many children are left without parents, and their grandparents are left to take care of them, even though they still need to take care of themselves. What would you do to help these grandparent caregivers, as well as the children of the opioid epidemic survivors, or victims?
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking the question and elevating this issue and elevating these grandparents who are caregivers for their grandkids and are placed in a really challenging, difficult situation. First thing that I'd say is I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. You studied it, you're interested in it. I want to make sure that I'm guided by your expertise. I've learned from listening to people in New Hampshire that many of the solutions to these challenges are present among us right now. I believe Manchester has a program called Safe Stations. Is that correct? You can go to any fire station, and without any risk of being criminally justice involved or seeing a police officer or being arrested, you can get overdose medication or help for an addiction. I think every single person who is struggling with opioids right now is not a problem for the criminal justice system. It is a public health opportunity for this country. So long-term recovery and treatment and care is going to be my priority and focus in the investments that we are going to make. I believe the vast majority of everybody with an opioid addiction was legally prescribed an opioid to begin with, so they did not ask for this problem. Let's make sure that we get them help, make sure that they get back into that household and able to raise their kids as soon as possible. If you have ideas on how we support those grandparents in this struggle that they have to raise yet another generation in their homes, I want to make sure that I follow your lead. But last thing, in addition to funding the public health, removing this from the purview of the criminal justice system, I also think it's really important that we hold the manufacturers and marketers of opioids accountable. Otherwise, there is impunity, and you will continue to see these problems going forward. So, Cynthia, if you don't mind, I want to make sure that I have a chance to talk with you afterwards to just get your ideas on how we specifically help those grandparents. Thank you very much.
Okay, and this is going to be our last question.
Great.
So I get the honor of asking the last question.
Thanks for being here.
Sure. Retired professor at Southern Hampshire University here in Manchester. I resonate to a lot of what you have said, and when you become the nominee, you're going to be up against you're going to be up against a trash machine, and I want to know how tough you can be, and especially when you get the socialism try to wrap around you.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for the question. One of the things that we'll be able to talk about is, I mentioned this earlier, moved back to El Paso in 1998. Soon thereafter, started a business. Created jobs and opportunity in the third poorest urban county in the United States of America. A place that was awash in talent, but just needed the opportunity and the channels through which it could express itself. And we all took a risk on one another, and that paid off, and it's part of the genius of capitalism. And I firmly believe that a far more inclusive and conscientious capitalism that involves every single American, especially those who've literally been drawn out of any opportunity to participate in the success of capitalism, is fundamental to meeting the challenges that we face. Just one of them, climate, and making sure that we fully free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels and invest in and invent the jobs of tomorrow, high skill, high wage, high paying. There's a role for government in that, but the innovation and ingenuity, the engine of capitalism, is going to be critical to our success in meeting this challenge for this and every generation that follows. And I hope to be able to tell a very compelling story about capitalism's role to do that, and the very fundamental changes that we need to make to our capitalism so that it is up to the challenge. To the first question that you asked, and the one that's on everybody's mind: how do we beat this guy? Because everything else that we want to do only becomes possible once he's defeated, and we're guaranteed that he will not serve a second term as president. We got a preview of this in El Paso in February. He came to our hometown, this largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, in an attempt to use us as a backdrop for his hatred, the paranoia, the anxiety, the racism that he's trying to instill in the rest of America, this wall that he wants to build. And meeting him in El Paso were 10,000 of my fellow El Pasoans, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, marching not against Donald Trump, but for this country, for the best traditions of America, and for a fearless future that includes every single one of us. I've never been so proud of my hometown or my country, and I've never so clearly seen the path forward for us. If we stoop down to his level, if we meet more of this fear and meanness and pettiness and name calling with the same, then we're going to get the same result. I'm convinced of it. But if we defy that fear with our own aspirations, with our kindness towards one another, the decency that is displayed here right now, I am confident that that's what America wants. It's what it wants to see. And that contrast could not be clearer. We saw in El Paso that I feel right here in Manchester today. It will not be a candidate, and it will not be a political party. It will be all of us that defeats Donald Trump and brings this great divided country back together again. So thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it. Let's build them. Thank you all for being here. Very grateful, and we'll see you soon, I hope. Gracias.
Thank you, Beto. Thank you, Beto.